Ray Mercer mopped the marble hallway outside courtroom 2B, like he did every morning, quiet and visible, just another man in coveralls blending into the shine. The courthouse bustled behind the heavy oak doors, clacking heels, whispered legalese papers fluttering like wings. He worked unnoticed beneath the ornate ceiling fans under the stare of old oil portraits of judges long dead. This place had history. It also had short memories. He paused, squeezing water from the mop, then glanced at the courtroom entrance. His eyes caught a flicker of movement, Heel's dark blue robes, a clipboard, and the unmistakable crispness of authority. Judge Camille Hargrove. She didn't look at him. She never did. Didn't matter. That afternoon, he'd be the one standing in front of her bench, not as the man with a mop, but as the defendant. And he wouldn't have a lawyer. "Ray, you sure you want to go in there alone, Mrs.?" Thelma's voice cracked the tension as she waddled up with her knit cardigan and grocery bag full of hard candies and backup tissues. She was pushing 80, but still came to court every week like it was church. She had watched him mop these halls for years. Ray gave her a soft smile. "I'll be fine, Thelma." She searched his face. "You're too calm for someone being accused of stealing a professor's car." Ray looked past her eyes, steady. "I didn't take it. That's enough for me." Thelma shook her head, sighing. "These people, they see coveralls and assume the rest." He didn't answer. At 2 p.m., the bailiff called the room to order. Ray stood at the defendant's table alone. No lawyer, no stack of files, just a folder with a few pages neatly clipped and a worn pencil tucked behind his ear. Judge Camille Hargrove entered like she was built into the bench itself. Hair in a flawless twist robe, pressed face unreadable. She adjusted her glasses as she skimmed the docket. State of Georgia versus Raymond C. Mercer. Her voice cut clean through the air. "Mr. Mercer, I see you've waived your right to counsel." "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was low but sure. Her eyes flicked up for the first time and really looked at him. "And you understand the seriousness of that decision, I do." She clicked her pen once against the wood. "Very well. You may remain standing." The assistant DA, Travis Colburn, rose from the opposite table in a slim navy suit that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. Late 30s. Confident, coached, the kind of smile that had closed more doors than it opened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "what we have today is a straightforward case. A man caught near a stolen vehicle. No key, tampered dashboard, witnesses, security footage. What we don't have is an excuse." He let the words settle. Then turned toward Ray with just enough tilt of the head to suggest pity. "The defendant may seem like an everyday man, a working man, but intent doesn't wear a uniform." Ray didn't move, didn't even blink. Colburn turned toward the judge. "We're ready to proceed, Your Honor." Camille nodded. "You may call your first witness." The prosecution called the arresting officer. Young, clear-cut, wearing the right tie for testimony. He described seeing Ray crouched near a car in the community college parking lot, fidgeting with the dashboard. When questioned, Ray refused to explain himself. Ray finally stepped forward. "May I cross, Your Honor?" Camille studied him. A pause. "You may." He approached the witness, slowly, deliberately, the way you might approach a sleeping dog on a porch. Careful, not fearful. Officer Ray began, voice steady. "You said I was fidgeting with the dashboard." "Yes, sir." "Were you inside the vehicle?" "No, I was about 20 feet away, in the dark, under a streetlight." Ray nodded. "Could you see whether the vehicle was locked?" The officer hesitated. "I assumed it was." "You didn't check, No. Did you witness me open the door?" "No." "Did you find damage to the door lock?" The officer shifted. Not visible damage. Ray turned slightly toward the jury. So to clarify, you saw someone near a car, assumed the worst, and now that assumption is being presented as fact. Objection, Your Honor. Colburn cut in. Sustained, Camille said, but her eyes lingered on Ray a beat longer than before. No further questions, Ray said, stepping back. The courtroom shifted. A few jurors leaned forward. Camille glanced down at her notes, tapped the pen once, then twice. When court adjourned for the day, Ray quietly gathered his papers. As he turned, Camille's voice halted him. Mr. Mercer. He looked up. I suggest you study courtroom procedure tonight if you plan to continue self-representation. A whisper of something flickered behind her words. Condescension, maybe. Or doubt. I have, he replied simply. Camille blinked. Just once, then study harder. He gave a polite nod. Good evening, Your Honor. She didn't reply. Outside the courthouse, Savannah's late sun hung low, casting gold light through the moss-covered oaks. Ray walked down the stone steps, loosening the collar of his shirt. Maisie was waiting on the bench near the fountain, swinging her feet, her backpack nearly half her size. She grinned and ran toward him, dog leash in one hand, Biscuit bounding behind her. Daddy. How was it? Did the judge yell at you? Ray smiled and knelt. No yelling, just questions. Did you win? He thought for a second. Not yet. She frowned, then offered a peanut butter sandwich she'd saved from lunch, now squished inside a paper towel. He took it like it was gold. From across the street, a figure stood watching Judge Hargrove, still in her robe, still sharp-edged, but now her gaze lingered not on the man in coveralls, but on the calm, collected voice that had just begun to shift the courtroom. She didn't smile. Not yet. But she would. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me, either way. The next morning, Savannah rolled in slow and warm, wrapped in mist that clung to the courthouse steps like breath that hadn't settled yet. Ray Mercer arrived early again, not because he had to, but because he always did. Years of habit, years of silence. He sat on the wooden bench outside courtroom 2B tie, slightly crooked folder in hand cup of gas station coffee cooling beside him. The courthouse was still waking up janitors, wiping down railings, clerks unlocking doors, legal aides in cheap blazers laughing too loudly about nothing important. Ray sat still watching, listening. The bailiff walked past, gave a nod. Back for round 2. Ray smiled faintly. Looks that way. At 8:52 a.m., the judge entered the building. Her heels clicked her robe draped over one arm, hair tied back tight. She wasn't smiling. Camille Hargrove moved like someone used to being watched, and obeyed. She paused as she passed him. You're early. So are you. That stopped her just long enough to glance sideways. Reviewing your strategy, Ray's voice stayed even. Just breathing. She didn't answer, just kept walking. But the slight turn of her head, the pause in her step, it was something. Small, but something. Inside the courtroom, Adia Travis Colburn was already adjusting his cufflinks, rehearsing lines only he could hear. He turned to Ray when he walked in, smiling the kind of smile that came with too many rehearsed victories. Mr. Mercer, Colburn said lightly, I must admit you caught a few people off guard yesterday. That cross-exam bold. Just asked questions, Ray replied. Colburn chuckled. Sure, but you ask them like you've done it before. He tilted his head. You sure you're just a janitor? Ray didn't respond. Of course, Colburn went on today, we'll see how good you are at handling evidence law. That's a different animal. He turned back to his files, voice floating in the air like smoke. Let's hope you brought more than a mop. Court was called into session at 9:00 sharp. Camille took the bench, gaze, steady chin lifted slightly. We will now hear testimony from the vehicle's registered owner, Dr. Geraldine Holt. Please call your witness. Dr. Holt stepped forward, composed and alert, her long scarf draped over her shoulder like a professor late to a lecture. She taught environmental sociology at the community college and carried herself with polished indignation. Colburn welcomed her like an old friend. Dr. Holt, can you tell us what happened the morning you discovered your vehicle had been tampered with? I received a call from campus security, she said. And then from the police. I was told someone had been seen near my car. When I checked, the glove box was open, and there were scratches near the ignition. And did you know Mr. Mercer personally? I'd seen him. Cleaning floors, emptying bins. He never spoke unless spoken to. Colburn's tone shifted. Would you say it was possible he felt entitled to your property, that he believed no one would question him? Ray's voice cut in calmly. Objection. That's speculative. Camille raised an eyebrow. Sustained. Colburn forced a smile. No further questions. Ray stood slowly walking toward Dr. Holt with his folder under one arm. Dr. Holt, how long have you worked at the college? 14 years. In that time, how many janitorial staff have you spoken to? She blinked. I don't keep count. Ballpark? A dozen, maybe. And how many would you say you remember by name? She shifted. Not many. Ray nodded. So if one of them greeted you in passing or waved or held a door, would you remember? I suppose not. You said I never spoke unless spoken to. Could it be you simply never spoke to me? The courtroom was quiet. Camille watched without expression. Dr. Holt crossed her arms. You're twisting this. No, ma'am. I'm clarifying. Ray stepped back. No further questions. There was a pause. Then Camille tapped her pen softly. Next witness. After the session broke for recess, Ray stepped out into the hallway. Maisie had arrived with Mrs. Thelma waiting just beyond the security station. He crouched to hug his daughter. You wore the blue one today, she said, tugging on his tie. Seemed lucky. She handed him a small paper bag. I made you lunch. He smiled, eyes soft. Thank you, sweetheart. Thelma leaned on her cane, whispering, Your daughter's teacher was asking about you. Ms. Clara Vance. Ray stood curious. What for said Maisie's been writing some very interesting essays. Mentioned you used to be a lawyer. Thelma raised an eyebrow. Ray's face didn't move. Kids make things up. Do they? She patted his shoulder. You're a hard one to read, Ray Mercer. That afternoon, the courtroom was less full, but the energy was different. Camille noticed it too. People were no longer just watching a trial. They were watching him, the janitor with courtroom instincts, the man who spoke like he'd once worn a different uniform. That night back at home, Ray sat at the kitchen table reviewing paperwork by the glow of a dim overhead light. The TV was off. The dog lay curled at his feet. Maisie sat across from him, with a school worksheet tapping her pencil. Daddy, she asked suddenly. Yeah, why do people think you're not smart? He looked up, heart catching for a beat. What makes you say that? I heard some kids at school say you're just a janitor. She frowned. But janitors can be smart? They can, he said softly. She stared at him, searching. But you're more than that, right? He met her eyes and smiled gently, quietly. I'm whatever you need me to be. She nodded. And that was enough. For now. Later that evening, as Ray walked Biscuit down the block, a car slowed near the curb. The window rolled down. Judge Camille Hargrove sat behind the wheel. They locked eyes. I didn't expect to see you here, she said. Same neighborhood, Ray replied. A beat. You handled yourself well today. Thank you, Your Honor. Another pause. Then something shifted in her expression, almost curiosity. "You speak like someone trained." Ray gave the faintest smile. "I read a lot." She let the silence hang, then nodded once, and drove away. Ray watched her go, and for the first time in years felt the stir of something more than survival, something closer to awakening. The next morning, Ray dropped Maisie off at school a few minutes late. She had forgotten her math homework on the kitchen table, and they'd backtracked halfway home to grab it. Neither of them complained. The ride was quiet but warm, filled with shared glances and the occasional hum of a country radio station low in the background. When Maisie climbed out of the car, her teacher was already standing outside the door, clipboard in hand. Clara Vance had that rare energy, soft but unmissable. Hair pinned up loosely, glasses perched on her nose, and a voice that didn't have to rise to command attention. She caught Ray's eye and smiled. "You're Ray Mercer, right?" He stepped out of the car and nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She extended her hand. "Clara, I teach Maisie." He shook it. Her grip was firm. "She's sharp," Clara said. "A little too sharp sometimes. Writes like she's lived twice her age." Ray gave a faint smile. "She gets that from her mother." Clara's expression softened. "She mentioned her mom passed a few years ago." He nodded. "Breast cancer." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." A brief silence stretched between them. Then Clara tilted her head, studying him. "She also said you used to be a lawyer." Ray's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Kids get creative." "I don't think she's lying." Clara's voice wasn't confrontational, just honest. He looked down at the sidewalk, then back at her. "Is she doing okay in class?" "She's doing better than okay, but she's distracted. Worried about you." "And the case?" Ray's jaw tightened just slightly. Clara added, "I'm not trying to pry. I just care about her. I know." He looked toward the school doors where Maisie had disappeared. "She's everything I've got." Clara's eyes lingered on him a moment longer. Then she said quietly, "If you ever want to talk. Not as a teacher, just as someone who listens." He gave a small nod of gratitude and turned back to his car. "Appreciate it." As he drove away, Clara watched him go, her hand resting lightly against her clipboard, a strange weight in her chest that hadn't been there before. That afternoon in court, the room had changed again. Word was spreading. The janitor defending himself wasn't just holding his ground, he was poking holes in the prosecution's confidence. The gallery was a little fuller. Even some local reporters were trickling in, scribbling notes, eyes darting between the defendant's table and the bench. Camille Hargrove had noticed it, too. She sat straighter, spoke more deliberately. Not because of nerves, because the temperature in the room had changed, and judges feel that in their bones. Ray stood with the same quiet presence, same crooked tie, same folder. But Camille found herself watching the way he took notes, how his eyes moved, just before a witness answered, how he paused long enough to let a question sit heavy before dropping the next one. The prosecution called in another faculty member, Professor Everett Green, from the history department. He claimed to have seen Ray near the parking lot a day prior to the alleged incident, loitering near staff cars. Colburn leaned into it hard. "Would you say he seemed out of place?" Everett shrugged. "I mean, he's usually around the janitor's closet or the hallway, not near faculty vehicles." "And did he say anything to you?" "No." Just nodded. Colburn smiled. "But it struck you as odd." "It struck me as not where he was supposed to be." Colburn turned toward the jury with that closing smirk. No further questions. Ray stood slowly, stepping forward with his folder closed under his arm. "Professor Green, what year did you start working at the college? 2009. And in that time, how often have you interacted with the janitorial staff?" Everett blinked. Not often, just in passing. Ray nodded. Did you know my name before today? There was a pause. No. So we've never had a conversation? Not that I recall. Yet you were confident enough to suggest I looked suspicious based on a nod. It was the location near a faculty car. Yes. Was that car parked near the back service door? Yes. Ray waited. Let it settle. Then added. The same door the janitorial staff uses to access the building. Everett looked flustered. I suppose. So it's possible I was walking toward my normal entrance and nodded at you out of habit. Maybe. I don't know. Ray turned to the judge. No further questions. Camille didn't move, but something flickered in her eyes. That same quiet heat from the night before. They broke for recess, and Ray stepped out into the hallway to find Clara waiting by the vending machines. She didn't look surprised to see him. She offered a quiet, "You made him look foolish." Ray shrugged. Didn't mean to. I just needed the truth out. She watched him for a moment, then handed him a bottled water. You look like someone who hasn't had lunch. He took it. I've had worse days. You've had worse years. That made him pause. She added, I'm sorry. That was forward. He unscrewed the cap, took a sip, then smiled gently. It's all right. It's true. They stood in silence, surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights and echoing footsteps. Finally, she asked, Do you ever miss it? Ray tilted his head. Miss whatever life you had before this one? He looked away, eyes unfocused. Every day, and not at all. She waited. He said softly, There's a difference between missing who you were and knowing who you have to be now. Clara looked at him like she was trying to memorize the shape of those words. Then her voice dropped low. Maisie's lucky. Not every kid has a father who's willing to lose everything just to stay close. Ray gave a tired smile. That's the one thing I won't lose. Later that night, Camille sat in her office, papers spread before her. She was reviewing transcripts, legal briefs, and still she couldn't stop thinking about his questions. They weren't just good. They were trained, intuitive, patient. Like someone who had spent years not just learning the law, but practicing it under pressure. She opened a file and typed in Raymond C. Mercer, legal background. Nothing came up. No bar license, no military records. But her gut said otherwise. Camille stared at the search bar, fingers frozen. Then she typed Mercer JAG Attorney Savannah. One link. Sealed file. She leaned back in her chair, heart tapping against her ribs in a rhythm she hadn't felt since law school. Something about him didn't add up. And something about him wouldn't leave her alone. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought matter to me either way. Rain whispered against the courthouse windows that morning, steady and soft, like the world was trying not to interrupt what was coming. The courtroom lights hummed above, casting a pale glow on waxed floors and old wood. The walls seemed to breathe a little heavier, as if they too sensed the weight of the day. Ray Mercer sat alone at the defense table folder, closed hands, folded neatly in front of him. No one would have known from looking at him that his heart had spent the night climbing walls. He hadn't slept. Not after Maisie had crawled into his bed at 2 a.m., whispering through tears that a classmate had told her she'd have to go live with strangers if her daddy lost the trial. He'd held her for an hour, silent, brushing her hair with his fingers, whispering nothing but the rhythm of breathing. Now the courtroom was filling again. Not just locals, reporters. One sat in the back row with a small notepad and a badge clipped to her coat, Savannah Weekly Observer. People were watching, but not for scandal. Not anymore. They were watching him. Judge Camille Hargrove entered from the chamber door with a poise that today felt slightly more practiced than natural. Her gaze landed on Ray for half a second longer than it should have. She noticed the circles under his eyes, the stillness in his posture, the way he wasn't just preparing for court, he was protecting something. Her pen clicked once. "We'll resume with the presentation of evidence," she said, her voice clear, but tight around the edges. Ada Travis Colburn stood. His smile was thinner today, more measured. "Your Honor." He began. The prosecution would like to enter security footage from the faculty lot, time-stamped 2 nights before the incident. It shows the defendant near Dr. Holt's vehicle, late evening, no janitorial shift scheduled. He clicked a remote. The footage played grainy and cold timestamp blinking in the corner. There was Ray walking slowly across the lot, stopping at Dr. Holt's car. He stood there, looking at it, hands in his pockets, then walked away. Silent tension filled the room like fog. Colburn paused the video. "Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant wasn't working. He wasn't cleaning. He had no reason to be there. Except one." He let it hang. Camille turned to Ray. "Mr. Mercer, you may respond." Ray rose, slowly walked to the front of the courtroom. His voice was quieter than usual, but there was something under it, like heat in a low flame. "If it pleases the court, I'd like to call a surprise witness." Colburn blinked. "Your Honor." "He's within his right," Camille said. "Go ahead, Mr. Mercer." Ray turned to the gallery. "The court calls Ms. Thelma June Rhodes." There was a small stir. Thelma, wrapped in a pink cardigan, stood from the third bench and made her way slowly to the witness box cane, tapping the floor with each step. She was sworn in. Ray approached. "Ms. Rhodes, how long have we been neighbors?" "About 5 years. And do you recall the night of June 3rd? She thought for a moment. "That's when your daughter had that school recital. You missed it." Ray nodded. "Do you remember why Thelma's eyes darkened?" "Maisie lost that little stuffed elephant her mama gave her. Wouldn't stop crying. You tore up half the house looking for it. Did I find it?" "Nope. Said she must have dropped it near your job, so you drove back to look." Ray turned to the courtroom. "June 3rd is the night in that video. I wasn't loitering. I was looking in the parking lot. Not for a car to steal." He paused, emotion pushing at the edge of his voice, "but for a child's elephant." He let it sit there. Quiet. Real. Camille blinked once, slowly. Colburn stood flustered. "There's no proof of this elephant." "No. It's in my daughter's backpack," Ray said calmly. Security found it 2 days later near the south stairwell. The court clerk verified it. Colburn sat back, lips pressed thin. Camille leaned forward, expression unreadable. "Thank you, Ms. Rhodes. You may step down." Thelma gave Ray a pat on the hand as she passed. "You keep telling the truth, baby. It'll hold. Court recessed early." Ray stepped out into the humid air, the rain now a mist. He didn't notice the reporter trailing behind him, or the whispering clerk near the elevators. He just stood under the archway, watching the sky, feeling the weight shift slightly off his chest. Camille found him there minutes later. She didn't speak right away. "Finally, I wasn't expecting that." He turned. The elephant or the truth? Her mouth curled slightly. "Both." He looked down. "People see the footage. They see what they want." "I've done that," she said. "A lot more than I'd like to admit." Their eyes met something unsaid, pulsing just beneath. "You're not just a janitor," she said quietly. "I never said I was." She hesitated. "Then you're not just defending yourself. You're protecting someone." He nodded. "Maisie." Camille looked away for a beat, then stepped back under the awning. "You're compelling in there." "I'm not performing." "I didn't say you were." Silence, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. Finally, Camille said, "Your daughter wrote a letter. I found it in the file. She asked the court to go easy on you." Ray's face shifted the smallest fracture in his stillness. "She shouldn't have had to do that," he said, his voice barely audible. "She said you make the best peanut butter sandwiches she's ever had. That broke something." He smiled, full and unguarded. Camille watched him, then added softly, "You remind me of someone I knew. Long ago." He waited. She didn't explain. "Be careful in there tomorrow," she said. "Colburn's going to push harder. I've been pushed harder." She nodded once, then turned to go. Halfway down the steps, she stopped. Without turning around, she said, "Don't prove me wrong." And then she was gone. The sound of her heels fading beneath the steady whisper of rain. Ray stood there, heart echoing, with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, and the flicker of something else. Something more dangerous. Connection. The next day arrived with a sharp brightness, the kind that made the sidewalks shimmer and the Spanish moss look silver instead of green. Savannah had shrugged off the rain like a coat it didn't need, and everything felt too crisp, too clean for the weight Ray carried in his chest. Court resumed at 9 a.m. sharp. Ray stood quietly as Judge Camille Hargrove entered the courtroom, eyes steady, jaw set. She looked at him longer this time, not with suspicion, but something more like curiosity, or caution, or both. The courtroom was fuller than ever. Word had spread about the janitor defending himself about the little girl's lost elephant, about the cross-examinations that made the prosecution squirm. Students from the college sat in the back rows. Faculty, too. Someone from the dean's office. Even Clara Vance had taken a seat beside Thelma, her notebook in her lap. Ada Colburn rose like he had something to prove. "Your Honor, he began the prosecution would like to call its final witness. One who can provide direct insight into the defendant's state of mind, an insight relevant to motive." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Colburn turned to the side door. "The state calls Ms. Savannah Bell." A tall woman entered, elegant in a navy suit, hair swept into a tight bun. Her heels didn't click, they landed. Quiet and deliberate. Ray's back straightened the moment she stepped into view. He didn't move otherwise. But Camille saw it. A shift. A ripple under the surface. Ms. Bell was sworn in and took the stand with practiced poise. Ms. Bell Colburn said smoothly, "Can you state your occupation for the record? I'm a regional HR investigator for the Board of Regents. And have you had professional interaction with the defendant, Mr. Mercer?" She didn't look at Ray. "Yes. I conducted an internal review of an incident at the college involving him 2 years ago." Colburn nodded. "Please elaborate." Savannah Bell folded her hands. "There was a disagreement with a faculty member over building access. Mr. Mercer challenged a new facilities policy citing safety concerns. He was assertive. There was no formal reprimand, but his tone was noted in our report." Colburn let her words settle like dust. "Then, did he ever mention frustrations with his job? Yes? Did he ever express feelings of being undervalued?" Savannah hesitated. "He once said, 'This isn't what I was meant to do.'" Ray closed his eyes just for a moment. Colburn's voice turned pointed. "So a man with intelligence resentment and no upward mobility. Would it be unreasonable to suggest that he may have—" "Snapped objection," Ray said quietly. "Sustained," Camille said sharper this time. Colburn backed off. No further questions. Camille looked toward Ray. "You may cross." Ray walked slowly to the witness stand. For the first time since the trial began, his voice held a different weight. Not louder. Just closer. "Ms. Bell," he said, "how long have you been with the board?" 8 years. "And in that time, how many investigations involved custodial staff?" She blinked. "I don't have that number. More than 5? Possibly. More than 10 unlikely. Do you recall why I challenged the facilities policy? She paused. You claimed the new door schedule created a safety hazard. Ray nodded. And a week later, a student was locked in the west stairwell overnight. Yes. She looked down. Yes. Was the policy adjusted? It was. Ray stepped forward, voice even. So when I said, "This isn't what I was meant to do," did I say it with resentment? Or sadness? Silence? I don't recall. He leaned in just slightly. That's all right. I do. Savannah Bell didn't look at him. No further questions. Camille stared at him for a long moment before clearing her throat. We'll adjourn for lunch. Return at 1:30 for closing arguments. Outside, Ray walked down the courthouse steps, each footfall heavier than the last. The sunshine felt harsh now. Unforgiving. He sat on the bench under the magnolia tree, head tilted back, eyes closed. Clara appeared beside him without a word. She held 2 sandwiches in wax paper and handed him one without asking. Turkey and cheese, she said softly. From the cafe near my school. He took it slowly. Thank you. They ate in silence for a while, just the breeze and the distant sound of traffic. Finally, Clara asked, Who was she? He didn't pretend not to know who she meant. Someone I knew in another life. Clara watched him. She looked at you like she used to know you better than anyone else. Ray didn't answer right away. Then, we were in the same program, law school. She was top of our class. Still is, I guess. Were you together? He smiled faintly. For a little while. Then life got in the way. Choices got in the way. Clara didn't press. She just let it breathe. Ray finally said, She knows what I used to be. That's why Colburn brought her in. To rattle you. To remind everyone I'm capable of more than floors and brooms. He looked down at his hands. Which in a court like this can be dangerous. Clara looked at him for a long moment. You don't scare easy. Ray shook his head. No. But it's different when your daughter's watching. The words cracked something in his voice. Clara placed a gentle hand on his. Just enough pressure to say she was there, not pushing, just staying. You'll win, she said. I don't need to win. I just need to not lose. At 1:30, sharp court resumed. Camille's gavel sounded like thunder in a quiet storm. Mr. Mercer, she said, you may proceed with your closing. Ray stood. He didn't bring notes, didn't look at the jury first. He looked at the judge. Then Colburn. Then finally the 12 people staring at him, like maybe they weren't sure what they believed anymore. I've been accused of something I didn't do, he began. But that's not really what this trial has been about, is it? He let the silence stretch. This trial's about who I look like, what I wear, where I stand when you walk into a room. A few jurors shifted. I'm not saying that's anyone's fault, but it's a fact. I clean floors, I fix leaks, I carry trash, and somehow that made it easier for people to believe I could carry off a crime. He stepped closer. But I don't want sympathy. I don't want special treatment. I want truth. I want my daughter to know that her father stood up for himself, not because he had a title, but because he had a voice. Ray looked toward Camille. His voice dropped. Sometimes truth doesn't wear a suit. It wears coveralls and carries a lunchbox. He turned back to the jury. And that should be enough. Then he sat. And the courtroom stayed quiet for a long, long time. The courtroom remained still, as if everyone had collectively forgotten how to breathe. Ray Mercer sat down, slowly folding his hands in his lap, his heart thudding louder than the silence. He didn't look at the jury. Not yet. He didn't need to. He had said everything that mattered. Camille Hargrove shifted in her seat, her gavel resting beside her hand, but untouched. She glanced at Colburn, who looked like he was debating whether to rebut, but what was there to argue. The truth had walked into that courtroom with work boots and a soft voice, and now it sat patiently waiting to be believed. "The jury will be dismissed to deliberate," Camille said, voice low but clear. "Court is in recess." The bailiff called order. The jurors were led out, and the doors creaked shut behind them. People murmured. Some stood, some stayed. The room didn't empty it, lingered like the truth was still hanging in the air, and no one wanted to be the first to pretend they hadn't felt it. Ray stood slowly, gathered his folder, and buttoned his coat. His tie was still crooked. He didn't bother fixing it. From the back row, Clara stood and met him halfway in the aisle. "You don't look nervous," she said softly. "I am." He exhaled. "I just don't have time to show it." Clara tilted her head. "You're not used to being seen, are you?" Ray blinked. "Not like this." She smiled gently. "You're better when you're seen. You speak from a place that matters." He nodded once, quietly. "Thanks for being here. I'm not here for the trial, Ray." That made him pause. Her words weren't romantic, they were real, honest, rooted in something deeper. Before he could respond, a voice called from behind them. Mr. Mercer Ray turned. It was Camille standing near the bench, robe loosened slightly at the collar. She didn't look like a judge right now. She looked like a woman fighting herself. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Clara gave him a soft nudge. "Go." Ray followed Camille toward her chambers, the door closing gently behind them. The room was warm, lined with books, framed degrees, and a vase of fresh lilies on the windowsill. The scent was faint, clean, calming. Camille leaned against her desk. Arms crossed, the confidence in her posture chipped just slightly. "I shouldn't be calling you in here," she said. "Not during jury deliberation. But I needed to ask you something, off the record." Ray stood still. "All right." She looked at him for a long moment. Not judging. Just seeing. "Why'd you walk away?" she asked. "From law, from all of it." Ray didn't answer right away. He stepped to the side, eyes drifting toward the window. "My wife Elena got sick. It came fast. 6 months from diagnosis to the end." Camille's face softened. "I didn't want Maisie growing up with a different parent every week. I didn't want her raised by court calendars and after-hours briefs. I needed to be home. Every day. Even if that meant mops and night shifts." He finally looked at her. "I didn't quit law, Camille. I just chose something else." She nodded slowly, as if trying to absorb that answer into places she hadn't looked in years. "You were always the best of us," she said quietly. Ray gave a small, sad smile. "You just remembered faster." Camille's gaze lingered heavy with unspoken memories. Then her voice dropped. "I looked you up. Tried to find your records. Everything's sealed. Military requested it, after my last case." Her eyes flicked up. Why Ray hesitated. Because the person I defended was innocent, but high-ranking enough that the truth was inconvenient. She breathed in through her nose, deep and slow. "You never stopped being a lawyer," she said. "I just stopped being their lawyer." Another silence. Camille stepped forward, voice softening. "You're going to win this, Ray." He shook his head, but not out of disbelief. "If I do, it's because someone believed in what wasn't easy to see." She didn't move for a moment. Then she reached to the side, pulled something from a drawer. A small folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. "It's from Maisie's letter," she said. "The court's copy was filed. I kept this." Ray unfolded it slowly. In a child's handwriting it read, "My daddy always tells the truth, even when it costs him. He says love is about showing up every single day, He always shows up." Ray swallowed hard. She wrote that Camille said because she's watching, and she knows exactly who her father is. Ray folded the paper and slipped it into his coat pocket. "I should get back," he said softly. Camille nodded. At the door, he paused. "You didn't have to tell me any of this." "No," she said. "But I needed to." As he opened the door, she added, "Ray." He turned. "When this is over, if you ever wanted to talk off the record, off the clock, I'd listen." There was no flirtation in her voice, just something that mattered more. Possibility. Ray nodded once. "I might take you up on that." He left the chambers quietly, just as the bailiff stepped out into the hall. "The jury's back," the man said. They reached a verdict. Ray's breath caught. Clara was already on her feet, eyes wide as she met his. Time slowed. In the courtroom, the jury filed in. No one whispered now. Even Colburn looked tense, jaw-tight pen still in his hand, but forgotten. Camille resumed the bench face, composed. But Ray saw the slight crease at the corner of her mouth. Something unreadable, or maybe just unread. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "has the jury reached a verdict?" The forewoman stood. "We have, Your Honor. Please read it." A pause. "Then, in the matter of the State of Georgia versus Raymond C. Mercer, we find the defendant not guilty." There was no gasp, no applause. Just breath released all at once, like the whole room had been holding it. Ray closed his eyes. Camille's gavel sounded. "Mr. Mercer, you are free to go. Court is adjourned." He looked at her one last time. She didn't smile, but her eyes did. As he stepped out of the courtroom, the doors opened to sunlight. Real sunlight. Warm and whole. Maisie was waiting on the steps, and she ran into his arms like she'd known all along what the truth would be. The first morning after the verdict felt strangely quiet. Ray Mercer sat at the kitchen table watching Maisie stir peanut butter into her oatmeal like it was the most serious task in the world. Her hair was still mussed from sleep, her glasses slightly crooked, but her smile came easy now. That deep kind of smile that doesn't check for permission first. It just shows up because it can. "You put too much," Ray said softly, watching the spoon disappear again into the bowl. Maisie grinned without looking up. "There's no such thing." He smiled back, but a trace of tension still lived behind his eyes. He hadn't stopped hearing the echo of the words "not guilty." It had rung through him like a church bell, but now that the trial was over, a different kind of uncertainty had settled in its place. Freedom was loud when you hadn't heard it in a while. Maisie pushed her bowl aside and leaned her elbows on the table. "Does this mean everything's back to normal now?" Ray reached for his coffee, paused. "What's normal, kiddo? You're not getting stopped at the gate," she said. "People not whispering." Ray nodded slowly. "I hope so." Maisie tilted her head. "Are you going to go back to law stuff now?" He looked at her carefully. "Why do you ask? I don't know. You were really good in court." He gave a small smile. "Being good at something doesn't always mean it's right for you." Maisie looked unconvinced, but said nothing. She reached for her spoon again. Later that morning, as he walked her to school, a few parents who had barely acknowledged him before now nodded politely. One even said, "Glad that whole thing got sorted." Another held the door open just a second longer. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and paperbacks. When they reached her classroom, Clara Vance was already at the door arranging art supplies on a rolling cart. She looked up and smiled. "Good morning," Morning Ray said. Maisie slipped past them with her backpack bouncing, giving Ray a wave, just before disappearing inside. Clara stepped out into the hallway with him. "I read the story in the paper," she said. "Front page." I didn't expect that, Ray replied, rubbing the back of his neck. Savannah's pretty plugged in at the Observer. She must have filed that the second the gavel dropped. She always knew how to move fast, Ray said without thinking, then caught himself. Clara raised an eyebrow. That who testified Savannah Bell Ray nodded once. She was your yeah, he said quietly. A long time ago. Clara looked at him, but not with jealousy. Just a calm, curious kind of awareness. Must have been strange, seeing her up there. It was, he admitted. But also, familiar. She's always been a chess player, thinking 6 moves ahead. And you? Ray shrugged. I used to be. Now I just try to stay standing. Clara smiled gently. You do more than that. He held her gaze for a moment. Something unspoken passed between them, an invitation, not a promise. I should get to work, Ray said. Clara touched his arm lightly. You ever think about teaching again? Teaching. She nodded. You'd be good at it. The way you spoke in court, people listened, even the ones who didn't want to. Ray looked down the hallway where students were already filling the rooms. I wouldn't know where to start. Maybe start with coffee, Clara said, offering a smile. No pressure. Ray's brows lifted slightly. Is that a job interview or a date? She smirked. I'll let you figure that out. He chuckled under his breath. All right. As he walked back to the car, the sun was climbing high, warming the sidewalks. He took his time noticing how the world looked a little different now. Brighter not because it had changed, but because something in him had. He passed the courthouse and stopped briefly, just stood across the street looking at the steps where he'd once felt so small. It didn't feel like a battleground now, just a building. A place he'd told the truth and survived it. Inside her chambers, Camille Hargrove stared at the sealed envelope on her desk. She'd written it the night before the verdict, a letter of recommendation. For Ray Mercer. No one had asked her to. But after what she'd seen in that courtroom, after reading Maisie's letter, after hearing Ray speak with more conviction than most lawyers she'd presided over, she couldn't not write it. Now it sat there unsigned. The clerk knocked on her door. Judge Hargrove, you've got someone here to see you. She blinked. Who is it? The clerk hesitated. He didn't give a name. Camille stood smoothing the front of her blazer. Send him in. The door opened, and Ray stepped in still in his work boots, jeans clean but worn eyes steady. Camille folded her arms, wary but curious. Didn't think I'd see you again so soon. I figured if I waited, I'd lose my nerve. She raised a brow. Nerve for what? He stepped forward slowly. You asked me once if I ever missed it. The life I had before. I remember. I told you I didn't miss the law, but that wasn't the full truth. She leaned on the edge of the desk, watching him. I miss the purpose, he said. I miss the feeling that what I say might actually matter, that it might help someone. Camille nodded slowly. And now Ray looked around the room, the walls lined with shelves, the scales of justice carved into the old molding. I'm thinking, maybe it still could. They stood there for a moment, the space between them filled with possibility. Not certainty. Not yet. Camille walked around her desk and held out the sealed envelope. He looked down at it. What's this A door, if you want it? Ray took it slowly, eyes never leaving hers. I've never walked through a door that wasn't locked, he said. Maybe it's time you kicked one open, she replied. His smile was slow and real. As he stepped out into the hallway, envelope in hand, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just that the trial was over. It was that something was finally beginning. The letter sat unopened on the passenger seat the entire ride home. Ray glanced at it more than once, but he didn't touch it. Not because he wasn't curious, he was, but because something inside him said the moment he opened it, everything would change. Again. And for once, he just wanted to live in the in-between, in the space where things still felt quiet, where the world hadn't yet asked him to become something else. Maisie was in the backyard when he pulled into the driveway, barefoot, her jeans rolled up and her hands busy building a fortress out of sticks and upside-down flower pots. Biscuit, their old mutt, lounged nearby in a patch of suntail, thumping lazily as Ray stepped out of the truck. "You're home early," she called, not looking up. "Didn't have to mop anything today," he replied. "Lucky," she said. "I had to do 2 math worksheets and read 3 chapters of Charlotte's Web." Ray chuckled as he stepped into the yard. "That's practically a full-time job." She grinned. "I better get paid." He walked over, crouched beside her little fort, brushing some pine straw from one of the walls. "Looks like it's coming together." "It's not done," she said. "The top part keeps falling." Ray studied it a moment, then reached for a small piece of bark, wedged it under one of the tilted pots. The structure held. Maisie's eyes lit up. "How'd you know that would work?" He smiled. "I've had to hold a lot of things up with less." She looked at him for a beat longer than usual, then went back to stacking. Later, after dinner, after dishes, after Maisie had curled up on the couch with Biscuit and a blanket that still smelled like childhood, Ray finally sat down at the kitchen table. The envelope was in front of him. He opened it. A single page. Letterhead crisp and clean. Camille's signature at the bottom. It was exactly what he thought it might be, and also not at all. A formal recommendation. Glowing. Precise. Enough to open doors back into the world of law adjunct teaching, consulting, maybe even representation. And beneath the official tone, there was something else. Something in her phrasing. Mr. Mercer's integrity is not just commendable, it is instructive. In my courtroom, he demonstrated not only legal acuity, but the kind of unwavering character that reminds the rest of us why justice exists. Ray folded the letter slowly, his fingers lingering on the crease. And then, as if timed by something larger than coincidence, his phone buzzed. A message from Camille. "Would you consider lunch tomorrow? No robes, no verdicts, just real food." Ray stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Before he could respond, the screen lit again. "I know a place where the biscuits are better than the courtroom ones." That made him smile. He typed back, "Only if you promise not to object when I order 2. She replied instantly, "I'll allow it." The next day the air was warm and thick with spring. They met at a small cafe tucked into a side street just off Jones Street. Whitewashed brick potted herbs on the windowsills, iced tea served in mason jars. The kind of place where time moved a little slower, and conversations felt more like confessions. Camille was already at the table when he arrived out of her judge's robe for the first time in jeans and a soft gray blouse. She looked less like authority, more like memory. And maybe that was the point. Ray sat across from her, nodding a quiet greeting. "You really came," she said, as if part of her hadn't fully believed he would. "I figured if I didn't, you'd subpoena me." Camille laughed, truly laughed, and something inside both of them seemed to unlock a little. They ordered. Biscuits, eggs, coffee. Ray passed on the bacon. Camille added honey to her tea, like she'd been doing it the same way for 20 years. They talked about nothing for a while. And then, gradually, they talked about the things that mattered. "You've changed," she said at one point, stirring her cup slowly. "Most people do," he said. "Not like this. You're grounded now, stronger somehow." He looked at her. "That strength came from knowing what I couldn't afford to lose." She held his gaze. "And did you?" He shook his head. "I almost did. But no. Not yet. Camille leaned back in her chair. I've sentenced people who were better spoken than most attorneys I know. But I've never seen a man with your past walk away from power the way you did. Ray took a breath. You say power. I say noise. And now she asked softly. I don't know yet, he admitted. I want to be there for Maisie, but I also want her to see me become something again, something I chose. Camille nodded, thoughtful. You could teach, she said. Or advocate. You don't have to wear a suit to change the world. Ray smiled. That almost sounds like advice. Old habit, she said with a wink. They lingered at the table longer than either expected. People came and went. The server refilled their coffee twice. Neither of them moved. Finally, as the check came, Camille looked at him. I hope this isn't just a chapter we close after the trial. Ray tilted his head. What do you mean? I mean, maybe this doesn't have to be a verdict and goodbye. Maybe it's something else, something open-ended. He considered that. Then he reached for the pen to sign the check and said quietly, I don't think I'm built for short stories anymore. Camille smiled. Not big, not loud, but real. They stepped outside together, sunlight curling through the branches overhead, the sidewalk warm beneath their feet. For a moment they stood there not saying anything. And then Camille turned to him. Same time next week, Ray nodded. Yeah, I think that sounds about right. As she walked away, her hand brushed against his. Just enough to say, this isn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time Ray pulled into the college parking lot on Monday morning, the letter from Camille was folded neatly in the inside pocket of his jacket, creased, worn at the edges, but never far from reach. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was proof. He parked in the far corner near the loading dock, where he usually entered with mop buckets and crates of cleaning supplies. But today he didn't carry anything. He didn't need to. As he crossed the courtyard, a few heads turned, not the usual look-away stares he'd gotten during the trial, but the kind that lingered soft, thoughtful, maybe even respectful. That was new. He stopped just short of the administrative building and took a breath. The red brick wall felt taller today. The whole place did. But he stepped forward anyway. Inside, the receptionist looked up from her computer. Her name tag read, Andrea, and her face was unfamiliar, maybe new. Still, she smiled politely. Can I help you? Ray cleared his throat. I have a meeting with Dean Vernon. She scanned the schedule on her screen, then nodded. Mr. Mercer. Yes, ma'am. You can go on in. He's expecting you. Ray walked down the corridor, the soles of his boots quieter than they used to be. Everything felt brighter here now, not because the lights had changed, but because he had. He wasn't just the janitor anymore. He knocked once and pushed open the door. Dean Vernon stood tall and slightly stooped, his salt and pepper hair combed back with meticulous care. He offered a hand across his cluttered desk. Ray, I'm glad you came. Ray shook it firmly. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Of course. Have a seat. Ray sat down, shifting slightly. The leather chair creaked beneath him. The dean opened a folder. You've caused quite a stir, you know, I've been told, Ray said dryly. You made the college paper. Twice. And the local news has been calling my office all week, asking if we're bringing you on in any formal capacity. Ray lifted an eyebrow. Are you? Dean Vernon smiled. That's up to you. He slid a manila envelope across the desk. Ray opened it. Inside was a formal offer, part-time adjunct instructor for criminal law foundations. 3 nights a week. Decent pay. Real title. Ray ran a thumb along the edge of the paper. This is long overdue, the dean finished. I'm not a traditional candidate. You're exactly the kind we need more of. Ray looked up, cautious. This doesn't feel like charity. It feels like the first right decision this place has made in a while. Ray sat back, letting the moment settle. "I'll think about it," he said finally, but there was a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The dean nodded. "Take your time. The offer stands." As Ray walked out of the building, sunlight spilled across the steps. He paused halfway down, pulled the letter from his coat, and looked at it again. Camille had known, before anyone else did. He slipped it back inside his jacket just as Clara appeared at the bottom of the steps. "Hey," she said, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Hey," he echoed, a little surprised and a little not. "I heard you were here." Ray gave a soft chuckle. "News travels fast around here. I teach fifth graders, Ray. I have spies in every hallway." They stood there for a beat. Then Clara added, "So, are you taking it? I'm thinking about it." She nodded slowly. "You're allowed to say yes to things you know." He smiled. "You sound like Camille. I'll take that as a compliment." Ray stepped down the last few stairs. We had lunch. Just us. Clara's expression didn't shift much, but something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, just recognition. "Is that a thing I don't know yet?" Ray said honestly. "Maybe. Maybe not." They stood in silence. Then Clara looked up at him. "You've got more than one door in front of you now. I'm still learning how to walk through them." Clara smiled gently, then bumped his shoulder with hers. "Just don't forget which ones matter most." That evening, Maisie came home from Clara's house barefoot and beaming a drawing clutched in her hand. "It's us," she said, holding it up. "You, me, and Biscuit, and that's your new classroom." Ray looked at the sketch stick figures and stars and one suspiciously wobbly whiteboard. He crouched down to her level. "You think I should do it?" Maisie nodded like it was the most obvious answer in the world. "You already teach me stuff all the time. You just don't get paid for it." He laughed and pulled her into a hug. "What if I'm nervous?" "You weren't nervous in court." "I was. I just didn't show it." She leaned back, squinting. "Then do the same thing now." Later, after she'd gone to bed, Ray stood in the hallway looking at the closed door to her room, listening to the soft hum of her sound machine and the rustle of blankets. He walked to the kitchen, turned on the light, and sat at the table. He opened the teaching offer again and signed his name. The next day, Camille got a message. "I took the job. I start next month. Thanks for the door." She replied almost instantly. "Proud of you. That door will stay open, Ray. Just like mine." And for the first time in years, Ray felt like he wasn't rebuilding a life. He was finally beginning one. The first day of class came with more nerves than Ray expected. Not because he didn't know the material he'd spent the last 2 weeks reviewing case law, organizing notes, and even watching old lectures online. It wasn't about the content. It was about the moment. For years, his world had been mop buckets, late-night shifts, whispered lullabies, and packing school lunches by the light of the fridge. Stepping into a college classroom again felt like walking into a version of himself he'd left behind in another lifetime. Maisie stood by the door that morning, a piece of toast in one hand and a grin on her face. "You look like someone who's about to do something important," she said. Ray adjusted the collar of his button-up. "It's just teaching. It's not just anything," she replied. "You're going to stand up and talk to a whole room of people and they're going to listen." He gave her a mock-serious look. "You say that like it's unusual." She smirked. "I mean, I don't always listen." He reached out and gently ruffled her hair, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Wish me luck." "Don't need to. You've got this." He left with her confidence tucked in his chest pocket, steadier than caffeine. At the college, the classroom was bright with wide windows overlooking a courtyard filled with early fall leaves. A dozen students trickled in, most with laptops open before they even sat down. Some looked up when Ray entered. Others barely noticed. He wrote his name on the whiteboard in firm strokes. Professor Mercer. "Morning, folks," he said, turning to face them. "I'm Ray. Some of you know me as the guy who used to clean these floors. Others maybe saw the news." A few students exchanged glances. A couple nodded faint recognition in their eyes. "I'm not here to impress you," he said simply. "I'm here to give you something that's going to stick whether you end up in a courtroom, a classroom, or somewhere else entirely." He paused, letting the silence stretch for just long enough. "I've been on both sides of justice. I've defended people who deserved it and watched others slip through cracks no system should have. What I care about isn't just the law, it's what happens when the law forgets to listen." And just like that, the room shifted. People looked up. Notebooks opened. Someone actually closed their laptop. He smiled quietly and began. Later, as students trickled out, one lingered behind. A young woman with dark curls pulled into a bun, her expression serious but curious. "Professor Mercer," she asked. "Ray's fine." She nodded. "I just wanted to say, this was different. I've taken intro law before. No one talks about what it feels like to be in the room. You made it feel human." He met her gaze. "That's the part most folks forget." She hesitated. "Can I ask something?" "Sure. Is it true, what they said in the paper? About your past?" He nodded once. "Most of it." She smiled slightly. "Then I'm glad you're here." After she left, Ray stood alone for a moment, letting the quiet fill the space. He could still hear her words. "You made it feel human." That night, he stopped by Camille's office. Not as a janitor, not even as a defendant, but as someone she now called a colleague. She looked up as he knocked on the open door. "I heard your first class was a hit," she said. "Who told you, Dean Vernon? He's already asked if you'd consider a second course next semester." Ray chuckled. "He moves fast. So do you." He stepped into the room, the evening light pouring through the windows, casting soft gold on the shelves and the crown molding. "I wanted to thank you again. For the letter. For the push." Camille tilted her head. "I didn't push. I just reminded you what you're made of." There was a pause, something almost weightless hanging between them. "Have dinner with me," Ray said suddenly. She blinked. "Are you asking me as the janitor, the lawyer, or the professor?" "None of the above," he said softly. "Just me." Camille stood slowly, gathering her coat from the back of her chair. "Then yes." "But I'm picking the place," he laughed. "I figured." They walked out into the cooling evening air. Camille's car was parked just beside his. Before she climbed in, she turned to face him. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel it," he replied. She stepped closer. "I meant what I said. You're not just good at law, Ray. You're good at people. I'm trying to be." She reached up her fingers, brushing his collar to straighten it just slightly. "You're doing just fine." He watched her drive away, then stood there a moment longer, hands in his pockets, heart full of something quiet and new. Back home, Maisie was waiting with a list of things she wanted to know about his day. What he wore, if anyone clapped what the room smelled like. He answered every question while she sketched him in her notebook this time, with glasses and a stack of books. "I gave you better hair," she said proudly. Ray laughed, and for a long moment they just sat there, father and daughter on the couch under a blanket of safety and soft light. He didn't need a gavel, or a robe, or a courtroom. He had something better, a second chance. And this time it was his to write. The first sign that something was off came in the form of a letter, creased, unsigned, and slid under Ray's office door late in the afternoon. He almost didn't notice it, caught up grading midterm drafts while sipping what was left of his second cup of coffee. The envelope had no name, just his title, scrawled in uneven print, Professor Mercer. He opened it without thinking, and then stopped breathing for half a second. Inside was a single photocopied page, his resignation letter from the JAG Corps. Not the public version, the one he'd filed privately, the one with handwritten edits, scribbled margins, and the reason he'd never shared with anyone but Savannah Bell. Ray stared at the page, a dull thud building behind his temples. There was no note, no return address, no explanation, only a message scribbled across the top in red ink. Truth always finds its way back, even when it's inconvenient. He sat there unmoving for a long moment, then slowly folded the letter, tucked it into his desk drawer, and locked it. At home, Maisie was busy with a science project, cardboard planets, hanging crookedly from a mobile she'd crafted from wire hangers. Biscuit snored from his spot by the back door. Everything was normal, but Ray's mind wouldn't stop replaying that phrase. Over and over. Truth always finds its way back. The next morning, just before class, Dean Vernon stopped him in the hallway. "Ray," he said carefully, "can we talk for a moment in my office?" Ray's stomach turned. Inside, the dean gestured to a chair and shut the door. "I received a packet this morning," he said, hands folded on his desk. "Anonymous. Contained personal materials about your past." Ray sat quietly, watching his face. Dean Vernon continued. "It included a version of your military resignation, handwritten notes, allegations that your departure wasn't as voluntary as you made it sound." Ray leaned forward. "I never claimed it was clean, but I've never lied either." The dean nodded. "I believe you. But the college has rules, and there's already noise. Students are talking. The local paper called me twice this morning." Ray looked down at his hands. "So what happens now?" "We're not terminating anything," the dean said carefully. "But I've been asked to place you on administrative leave until this is resolved." Ray looked up. "How do you resolve a ghost?" Dean Vernon exhaled. "Find out who's stirring the grave." As Ray walked out of the office, the hallway buzzed faintly. Students murmured, some looked up from phones, eyes skimming over him like a headline they weren't supposed to recognize. He didn't stop walking. That afternoon, he called Camille. She answered on the second ring. "I heard," she said before he could speak. Ray closed his eyes. "You too. There's chatter in the courthouse. Someone's been busy. I haven't spoken about that file in over a decade. Not even to Clara. Then someone's digging." He paused. "You think it's Savannah? Camille didn't answer immediately. You were the last story she never got to finish." Ray's voice was quiet. She was at the trial. She helped. She also knew exactly what was in that file, and where it would hurt most. The silence stretched. Camille added, "You need to talk to her. I don't know if I trust myself to." "Then don't trust yourself," she said gently. "Trust the part of you that's trying to build something again." Ray exhaled. "Maisie doesn't know anything. I don't want her scared." "Then show her what it looks like to stand still when the wind kicks up." He hung up with a pit forming in his chest. That night after Maisie went to bed, he stood by the kitchen sink, hands braced against the counter. The house was quiet except for the creak of floorboards and the distant hum of cicadas outside. He opened his phone and scrolled through old contacts. Savannah Bell's number was still there, buried at the bottom. He stared at it. Then with a slow breath, he pressed call. Savannah's voice hadn't changed. It still carried that smoky news anchor calm, like every word had been pre-approved by a producer and smoothed in post. But Ray could hear the shift in her breath when she answered. A slight catch, like she'd been expecting this call and dreading it all at once. "Well," she said softly, "there's a voice I never thought I'd hear again." Ray stood in the dark kitchen, the glow of the oven clock casting just enough light to show the edges of his regret. "I think you and I need to talk," he said. "I'd say that's an understatement." There was a long silence on the line, thick with things unsaid. Finally, Savannah added, "Meet me at Lafayette Park, that old bench under the oak. Tomorrow morning, 7 sharp. Ray hesitated. "Why there? Because it's where the truth got buried. Might as well dig it up in the same dirt." The line went dead. The next morning was gray and humid, the kind of Savannah dawn that clung to your skin before the sun had even fully shown up. Ray arrived early. He always did. The bench was just as he remembered, weather-worn carved initials fading into the wood roots curling beneath it, like the fingers of memory itself. Savannah showed up 5 minutes late. She wore jeans and a crisp white blouse, her hair pulled back, not a microphone or camera in sight. Just her and that sharp, unreadable stare. "You look the same," she said, sliding onto the bench beside him. "You don't." "Good," she replied. "I spent a lot of money to make sure of that." Ray didn't smile. He got right to it. "You leaked my resignation file." Savannah didn't deny it. "You deserved the truth to come out," she said, voice steady. "No," Ray said quietly. "You wanted to control the story again." She looked away toward the branches above. "You think I did it for revenge. I think you never liked not having the last word." Savannah leaned back. "You're wrong. I did it because people need to know who they're trusting in those classrooms. You walked away from the law with secrets, Ray. Secrets that cost you everything." "I walked away to raise my daughter," he said, voice tighter now. "I left a system that buried emotion and rewarded ego. I chose love over ambition. That's not a secret. That's survival." Savannah's jaw flexed. "You didn't just walk away. You imploded. And I was left to pick up the narrative without the man who made it matter." He turned to her fully, now eyes sharp. "You're not the victim here." "No," she said softer. "But I'm not the villain either." Ray stood pacing a few steps, then stopped. "Why now?" After all these years, Savannah's eyes narrowed. "Because I watched you stand in that courtroom and remind people what justice is supposed to look like. And part of me hated how easy it looked. Like you never paid for walking away." Ray exhaled slowly. "You think I haven't paid?" He stepped closer, quieter now. "Try explaining to your daughter why you mop floors at the place where you once lectured. Try folding little socks while your past knocks on every door except the one you want to open." "I paid Savannah. I paid in full." She looked up at him then, and something broke in her expression. The hardness softened just enough to show the wound beneath. "I didn't want to destroy you," she said barely above a whisper. "You didn't," he replied. "But you chipped away at the one thing I've been trying to rebuild: trust." They stood in silence, the branches above creaking gently in the morning breeze. Ray pulled a folded paper from his pocket. It was the offer letter from the college. "She almost cost me this," he said. "Maisie, my classroom, my peace." Savannah's eyes flicked to the page. "Then why come here?" He met her gaze. "Because I needed to look you in the eye and let go of the part of me that still hoped you'd understand." He turned to walk away. But before he could, Savannah called out, "Ray!" He paused, not facing her. "Was it worth it?" she asked. Giving up the courtroom, the name, everything he didn't turn back. Just said every day. And then he walked away from the bench, from the file, from the noise, toward something quieter, stronger, his truth still standing. It had been 4 days since the meeting at the park. Ray hadn't spoken about it, not to Camille, not to Maisie, not even to himself. But the silence had weight. He felt it when he passed the campus bulletin board and caught whispers in the hallway. Felt it when a student hesitated before asking a question like, They weren't sure who he really was anymore. The college hadn't withdrawn his position. Dean Vernon, true to his word, stood behind him. But something had shifted, not in title or policy, in energy. And Camille could feel it, too. She found him that Friday evening, alone, on the bleachers overlooking the rec field. The sun was low sky, bruising into gold and lavender. Maisie had a sleepover, and Ray looked like he'd forgotten how to fill a Friday night without her. Camille climbed the steps and sat beside him, not speaking right away, just letting the hush settle. "I saw your name trending," she said, finally breaking the quiet with care. Ray didn't look at her. "Funny how fast your past gets louder than your present." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Do you regret going back into the classroom?" "No," he said without hesitation. Then, after a breath, "But I regret thinking I could outrun the parts of me that never got closure." Camille turned her head to study him. "You didn't run? You chose differently. That's not the same thing." Ray let the silence stretch. "Maisie asked me today if being brave means doing something scary." Camille smiled faintly. "And what did you say I told her?" "Bravery is doing something scary even after someone's tried to shame you out of it." He finally looked at her. She just nodded and said, "Okay," and went back to building her Lego courthouse. Camille laughed softly, the sound warmer than the breeze. "Smart girl. She is." Ray said, a flicker of pride crossing his face. "She knows what I didn't at her age." Camille's voice softened. "You did what you could with what you had." Ray's shoulders lowered just a little, like something inside him unclenched. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded note. It wasn't the resignation letter. It was Maisie's drawing from weeks ago, the stick figure sketch of the three of them, him, her, and Biscuit. "I keep this with me," he said, holding it gently, "to remember what matters." Camille looked at it, then at him. "You still afraid of stepping forward?" she asked. "I'm not afraid of the truth anymore," he said. "I'm afraid of what it takes to keep choosing it. When the world keeps trying to rewrite your chapters without your permission." Camille reached over her hand, brushing his. Not grabbing. Just there. "You're the one holding the pen now," she said. "Don't let them take that back." Ray's eyes flicked to her, something shifting in his gaze, softening, yes, but also sharpening. He took her hand fully, no fingers lacing together. She didn't pull away. And for the first time in a long while, neither of them did. Below them, the last soccer players were leaving the field, laughter trailing behind like music on wind. The lights buzzed to life overhead, casting long, clean shadows across the grass. Ray turned toward her. "You still picking the place for dinner?" She grinned. "Already made a reservation." He raised an eyebrow. "Planning ahead," Camille shrugged. "Maybe I knew this conversation was coming." Ray smiled, slow and steady. "Then maybe I'm ready for it now." They sat there a little longer, watching the day fold into evening. And somewhere between the old noise of the past and the steady quiet of the present, a new chapter opened without needing to shout. The restaurant Camille chose was tucked beneath a canopy of string lights and live oaks, its wooden sign weathered just enough to feel like a place you wanted to return to. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it had heart, just like her. Ray had dressed with quiet care, nothing too formal, but enough to show it mattered. When he stepped inside and saw her waiting at the table near the window, her blouse a soft navy, and her eyes reflecting the candlelight, he paused. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because something inside him settled, like the last piece had finally found its place. "You're early," she said as he approached. "Couldn't risk missing the one table with the best view," he replied. Camille smiled, setting down her glass. Smooth, accurate. They both laughed, and the tension that had followed them for weeks melted just enough to let the evening begin. Dinner unfolded like something remembered, more than planned, comfortable, unrushed. They talked about Maisie, about campus, about the things that didn't make headlines but made up real life. Camille shared stories from her early days on the bench, and Ray listened, watching the way her hands moved when she got passionate, the way her smile curved when she caught herself caring too much. At one point, she leaned in slightly. "I keep wondering why I fought you so hard in that courtroom." Ray tilted his head. "Because I made you uncomfortable." Camille nodded slowly. "I think you reminded me of what I gave up to become who I thought I had to be." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it?" Her eyes met his. "Some nights." Ray leaned back, exhaling. "I used to think walking away from law made me weak." Camille reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "But it didn't. It made you honest." The moment lingered, suspended in the air between them. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. After dinner, they stepped outside. The night had cooled, but the air was still soft, thick with the smell of jasmine and the low hum of cicadas. They walked without speaking for a while, letting the silence do the talking. And then Camille stopped near her car. "I meant what I said," she told him. "You being here teaching, showing up for Maisie, it's not just a second chance. It's the right one." Ray nodded. "It doesn't feel like I'm fixing the past anymore. It feels like I'm finally building forward." She hesitated, then added, "You've changed me, Ray." His eyes softened. "Maybe we're both just remembering who we were before the noise." She smiled, eyes glassy but not breaking. "Thank you for tonight." He stepped closer, not rushed, not unsure. Just present. And gently, almost as if asking permission, he said, "Can I see you again?" Camille's answer was quiet but unwavering. Yes. They didn't kiss, they didn't need to, because in that moment everything said in silence was more honest than anything words could carry. That night, Ray tucked Maisie into bed after she'd fallen asleep on the couch, watching old cartoons. As he smoothed her blanket, she stirred. "Daddy, yeah, baby. Did you have a good dinner?" He smiled, brushing hair from her forehead. "The best." She blinked sleepily. "Did she make you laugh?" "She did." Maisie yawned. "Good. You need that." Ray stood by her doorway a little longer than usual after turning off the light. Not because he was worried, but because for the first time in a long time, the quiet felt like peace. Not absence. Presence. It started with a knock, soft, hesitant, just after dusk. Ray was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, humming quietly to the tune Maisie had been singing earlier in the car, some catchy melody about the planets she'd learned in science class. He didn't expect company. Biscuit barely lifted his head from his spot on the rug. Ray dried his hands, walked to the door, and opened it. Camille stood there holding a small rectangular box and wearing a look that was halfway between a smile and something more uncertain. "I brought something," she said. He stepped aside, letting her in. "You never show up empty-handed. I was raised right." She walked into the living room, pausing near the mantel where Maisie's art projects lived. Her gaze lingered on a clay sculpture, a lopsided version of the courthouse they'd visited together during the field trip weeks earlier. "She gave me one of those," Camille said. "Said it was so I could remember to be nicer in court." Ray chuckled. "She's a blunt little counselor. She's also right." Camille turned back to him, more serious now. "You never told me what the college decided." "They reinstated me fully this morning," he said. "Cleared the record. No conditions." She exhaled, visibly relieved. "That's not all," he added, moving to the table and picking up a formal envelope. They offered me the pre-law department lead next semester. Camille's brows lifted. Ray, I said no. The silence landed between them like a held breath. Why, she asked softly. He looked at her eyes, steady, not guarded. Because I don't need a title to feel like I've earned this life, he said. I just want to teach. Be present. Build slowly. Camille stepped closer. That's the bravest answer I've heard in a long time. Ray nodded. I've chased things before recognition redemption. But peace, that's what I want Maisie to grow up seeing. Not her dad fighting ghosts. They stood there quietly, the kind of stillness that feels full, not empty. Camille held out the box. Ray hesitated, then took it and opened the lid. Inside was a small, simple plaque. On it, engraved in brushed silver, were the words, "Truth doesn't wear a suit. It wears whatever love needs it to." Ray stared at it, heart-catching. I wrote that down the day of your trial, Camille said. You said it after the verdict, just under your breath, like it wasn't meant to be heard. But I heard it. He looked up, eyes glassed with something he didn't try to hide. I forgot I said that. Well, she said, stepping close, some truths are worth repeating. He set the plaque on the shelf beside Maisie's sculpture, and then he reached for her hand, slowly, deliberately. There's something else, he said. Maisie asked me this morning if Camille was coming to Thanksgiving. Camille tilted her head. And what did you tell her? I told her I hoped so. Because there's someone at that table who makes this house feel more like home. Camille's smile wavered just a bit. I wasn't sure where I stood. Ray's voice was quiet. You're here. That's where. She stepped in, resting her forehead against his. You know, for a man who doesn't talk much, you say exactly the right things. He closed his eyes. Only when it matters. A creak from the hallway broke the moment. They turned to see Maisie standing there in oversized pajamas, Biscuit trotting sleepily beside her. Is she staying for dinner? Maisie asked, rubbing one eye. Camille looked to Ray, letting him answer. If she wants to, he said. Camille nodded. I'd love to. Maisie grinned and shuffled towards the kitchen. We're having grilled cheese and tomato soup. I helped, Ray chuckled. That's a strong selling point. As they followed her, Camille whispered, You're building something beautiful here. Ray looked at the soft chaos of the living room, the fridge covered in magnets, the sounds of Maisie talking to Biscuit like he was listening. I know, he said. Later that night, after dishes were done, and Maisie had fallen asleep watching a movie, Camille stood at the door, her coat in hand. Ray leaned in the frame. This isn't the end, is it? She asked. No, he said. It's the beginning we didn't know we were waiting for. She kissed him soft, brief but certain, and stepped into the night. Ray closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed. Peace didn't always come loudly. Sometimes it came in the quiet after the storm. In grilled cheese dinners and messy clay sculptures, in a woman brave enough to admit she was wrong, and in a man brave enough to begin again. He walked to the mantel, touched the plaque gently, then turned off the lights. Let the stillness speak. Let the truth stand.